let's kick it off. This week, we're going to chat about FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, opening an investigation into OpenAI, new release by ChatGPT of custom instructions, some interesting things Charlie pulled around the history of art, and then I will talk more about, the future of AI. But yeah, bang, bang, let's kick it off. We talked about it very briefly in the last episode, and I said I'd pull in more information on it. But the Federal Trade Commission is opening an investigation into OpenAI. Basically, they're probing OpenAI about potential consumer law breaches, specifically like the accuracy of ChatGPT. So they issued a 20-page inquiry letter asking for data details and consumer complaints that are all around ChatGPT causing reputational harm by not giving accurate information and giving false information, which is, I don't know about you, but one of the things that I saw so much when ChatGPT launched, people would instantly try and find places where they got information that wasn't correct and then either post about it or tell people about it and be like, this is nothing, it doesn't even know how to answer this.
Yeah, exactly. It's not useful,
Yeah, which is interesting. It's a new, I think AI chatbots are like a brand new sort of technology that we're using. And there's definitely questions around does everything have to be 100% accurate? Where do you draw the line on what is accurate? I don't know really. Like I think when I see something that isn't accurate, I just keep going forward. I don't open up a complaint, or I don't take everything as 100% true.
Yeah, 100%. Right? How could you? I guess that the problem is that when you as well as I do, when you have a prompt and you're using it and you're looking for you're looking for specific information, and it provides you with a really good example. In the beginning, before I understood that it's a reasoning engine, and I thought it was more of like an encyclopedia that you could query, which it's not. I was asking it for, I would provide it with a lyric out of context and say, what song is this from?
Yeah.
And it would get it wrong every time. It would tell me a different artist or the same artist from a wrong album, or some combination of that, or of the wrong song. And so I was like, yeah, screw this. And I remember very vividly sending those to you, and you being like, dude, it's not really what it's useful for. It's not like it's just, I'm not sure what you'd said, but it's not an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
So, but it would explain it as if it knew the answer definitively. And that's maybe what it is that they're trying to get at here, is that it's hard to tell when it's wrong or when it's hallucinating, because everybody calls it hallucinations. So it's hard to tell when the hallucinations are actually hallucinations, or because then I would then query it more and be like, are you sure it's not this? Or I thought it was this. It's like, I'm sorry. It's quick to say it's wrong.
Yeah.
But it doesn't then provide the right answer necessarily the second time either, because it really just doesn't know. It doesn't have the right data sets for that sort of information. It depends on what sort of information you're looking for. So I don't know. This is interesting. It kind of shows me that they don't really know what it is.
Yeah. Also, it feels like, well, I don't think this by any means will take down ChatGPT. I would hope not.
No, of course not.
Consumer complaints. They now have, I don't know when they put it in. I'm assuming pretty quickly after they launched it. There's a boilerplate warning at the bottom of every chat that says ChatGPT may produce inaccurate information about people, places, or facts. Then it links to whatever their terms of use are. But I think it is interesting. I think maybe they didn't do a good job of explaining at the jump what it should be used for, and then people used it for things and put onto ChatGPT what they were expecting, which is, I want you to give me exactly what I want. And whereas with Google, if you type in, Thai restaurants in Boise, Idaho, and it gives you the wrong ones, you're just gonna be like, well, okay, well, I don't want to use this anymore. You're not going to go show up to a place and it turns out to be an elementary school and you think it's a restaurant.
That's a good point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to follow and see how this goes, and also see how people's perspective of what AI offers. Is it a source of truth? or is it a tool to accomplish things? And I tend to think of it more as a tool to accomplish things rather than
Yeah.
where I go and get all my information.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I'm glad you looked into it a little bit. I hadn't, and so yeah, it's a reasoning engine, right? We talk about that a lot. That was like
Yeah.
a realization that I had just from through my own experience. Like, oh wow, this is not an encyclopedia that I can query.
Yeah.
It's not some sort of Wikipedia at all. It's only as good as the information and context is that you provide it with. And the large language model and the data set that it works from is incredibly expansive, but it's not. Sam Altman, he had said um, in an interview that it's like the worst or slowest, most clunky search engine around. It's not a search, meaning it's not a search engine.
Yeah.
If you're using it for that, you're using it. You don't understand fundamentally what it is. It's a reasoning engine. It's not a search engine. So employing it to do the reasoning for you, I think, is the best use case.
Yeah. I think my thinking of how I use it now too is more concrete than it's been in the past. Whereas like I use it for help writing stuff, help writing code, help doing data analysis, and then almost as a brainstorming partner or somebody to bounce ideas off or figure out, like a person to talk to almost.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is cool.
I've also been using, and I shared a screenshot with you. I've done this a few times now. I've been providing it with contracts, especially contract drafts, or even like a full contract, like an employment contract or a statement of work or a service agreement, and providing it with that. But first, I'll perfect the prompt with Prompt Perfect. So I'll the context that I'll provide is something like, "You're a legal expert that I just saw you out of the corner of my eye moving, but shout out to the creator." And so then I'll provide it with context and I'll perfect it and I'll say something along the lines of, "You're a legal expert that has deep knowledge in contracts, and you can you please provide me with any oddities, irregularities, anything of note, and anything that stands out to you, and generally summarize this for me, get that perfected, and then it'll say, please provide me with the contract," and I'll provide it with the contract. And then it'll go through. I've done it in a few different ways. So I've done it that way. I've also said, can you please provide me with a summary of each of the sections of this document? So that, because so many of those documents, I'm used to reading them, but they're still legalese, and it's not so easy to necessarily read them in the same way as a novel. And so it's a little bit just like the way, like there's a lot of like hitherto and whereas and this, all these weird words that you never would have read. And so it's a little bit easier to have it summarize it for you. That's a great use case for me that I've been using it for as well. Is like taking something that's much longer and like translating it for me, although it's in the same language, like translating it contextually for me to better understand it. That's another use case I've used it for that you didn't mention, just as an additional one.
Yeah, that's cool. Also, that kind of going into our next topic, custom instructions. So OpenAI released what are called custom instructions on ChatGPT. It's a way to customize and personalize ChatGPT for your use case. So as you're saying, like if you wanted it to be almost like a legal expert where it looks over contracts and specifically looks for oddities or things that are out of the ordinary or might be of note, there's now a feature where if you have Plus, and I think they're rolling it out to everybody, you go in and you can insert a custom instruction, kind of like you did at the beginning of that. Like, you are a legal expert, this is what you do. And then you could even, in the part underneath that, like be like, here's a few examples of things that might stick out. And then when you save those custom instructions, anytime you start a new chat, it references those, which is cool. So all future interactions will go through that filter. One of the things that examples they used is like a teacher can specify that they're teaching third grade science, and ChatGPT will remember it, so that, if they're like, I need a lesson plan for 5 days talking about the solar system, it'll already know that they're a third grade science teacher. It'll know what age they're going for. And it makes it really cool for people who are doing tasks that are of the same thing. If you're doing marketing, you can be like, you're an expert tweet writer. Here's some examples of good tweets. And then when you go in and give it some information and say, write a tweet about this, it can reference all that, which is cool.
It's almost like prompt engineering for the for ChatGPT, really. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So and that's what when I first seen that roll out, just by I didn't see any public any sort of public announcement about this. By the way, I just was going through the beta features and checking out what's going on because
Yeah.
that's the place that you find them. And so I found that, turned it on, was playing with it a little bit. The problem for me is that I don't really want, like, so many of my chats, I look through the history, I don't really delete many of them. So I have hundreds now, and there are so many different things I've asked about. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm an employee working in New York. Like, the context for each and every one is very different. So like, I want to know about tax law. I want to know about business processes and writing standard operating procedures. I want to understand legal work. And it's like, these are all very different contexts that I want to provide. And so I've been using Prompt Perfect to like get really, really nuanced prompt engineering for each of my queries. If I was using it very consistently from one perspective, I see that as a very something that's really valuable. But for me, I use it so differently almost every time I use it, that it just doesn't really. I haven't really gotten.
I think
I played with it a little bit and I stopped using it, to be honest.
Yeah. When I first saw the announcement, I was like, oh, because it didn't have a lot of fanfare. It's really cool for power users and people who are kind of do the same thing over and over again. I don't think it is for the masses, I don't think people are going to know exactly what to put in there. But if you really mess around with prompt engineering, it's cool to play with. It's something that was been available in their playground, which is a feature that it's like a more advanced feature that you can mess around with on OpenAI if you go create an account with them. It's been around for a while, and I've used it for writing code and stuff, which is cool, giving it context on code in the custom instructions, which can be sweet. But for the purposes of what Prompt Perfect is, I still don't think people know how to write great prompts or care to spend a lot of time crafting them. And so I think it's a move in the right direction for OpenAI having like custom, like making things more personalized and custom, but it doesn't quite solve all the problems that I see people having, which is good because we're solving them. We're building stuff. I like that people build stuff for it.
That relates actually to a different point, which we had last. But there was a podcast you had mentioned that you had gotten inspiration from on a previous podcast, and so then I went and rewatched it. And at the very end of that podcast, it's a YC podcast. You know the hosts. I don't know their names.
Michael Seibel and Dalton Caldwell.
There you go. Yeah. I love there have been some other podcasts that we've talked about, like, oh, we should emulate this, or like, oh, that's cool how these guys do that. And I think that those guys have really good rapport in a way that most don't. And so I think that that's something that I definitely gained from their podcast is like inspiration. But nonetheless, just like also like just general inspiration, because one of the things that they had said was it's time for optimism, quote unquote. And that is in reference to entrepreneurs building with AI, because these large companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, there are so many examples. I have so many open. Inflection.ai, and also, I mean, some of them are database companies, so they're not as relevant, but like LangChain and Arthur, and they're Mosaic. Like, these are all really, really interesting companies that are building in this space that are relatively large and relatively well funded, and they're large teams. They're not one or two guys, or guys or gals, whatever it is. But these guys were saying, these two in the podcast, the YC podcast, are saying it's time for optimism for entrepreneurs building an AI for exactly the reason you were just saying, is because the consumer products that are most useful, that people don't know how to build a good prompt to then put into the custom instructions. Like, there's still a gap there in people's knowledge in general, and there's an opportunity there for people like yourself, and there are others, and you're running this conference with several others, for example, people who are building useful tools that are consumer products that are so much smaller in scope than AGI. And AGI is the focus for those very large companies, really. OpenAI, Anthropic, that's where their focus is. They're really building and really focused on, laser sharp focused on AGI. And I guess it makes sense maybe for us to talk about what AGI is. We spoke about it like maybe 2 months ago. But artificial general intelligence is more about, it's like the autonomous features such that, like everything. I think of it as, maybe, I'm sure you can do a better job of explaining it, but my first shot at it would be having things more interconnected such that they're not all siloed tools. And so it allow for me to not have like reminders and calendars and all those different tools like somewhat connected on my iPhone, but really they're not that connected. And it would allow for Siri to then be able to sort of query in a much more comprehensive way, just by virtue of the fact that everything is interconnected in more of a neural network. That's that's a very high level. Like that's just how I think about it. I don't know that I've ever articulated it. That doesn't sound.
Yeah, I know it's a hard thing because nobody knows exactly what it looks like yet either. But the idea is that AI, people, it's such a broad thing that AGI is what OpenAI was founded for, to create like an equitable AGI. Which I think the way that the shortest way to describe it is uh, an artificial intelligence system that is as good or better than like the median human at doing tasks. So if my job was to write a tweet uh, on this and you give it to an AGI, it does it as good, if not better than me. And same with it. I mean, that's such a small task, you know,
Yeah, no, it's a good
running,
example though because it's so
running
good.
the P&L. Yeah. If you could have a computer system do that as good or better than a general human, then that's kind of what they're going for. Um, and then who knows what it looks like, you know? I tend to be of the subscription that like you could kind of achieve that through prompt engineering with the tools we already have. People want to build different models when in reality there's such a wide swath of you can have things operate as well as humans if you give it the right instructions and reasoning and like thought processes. Um, but I think I'm
Yeah.
in the minority there.
Well, you had said in a previous episode, which I wrote down a couple of weeks ago, you were saying like you could build a company advisor for your own company and then ask questions of it by providing, first and foremost, you provide it with data and then ultimately ask it insights of the data,
Yeah.
insert your business goals, asking it what to work on, those sorts of things. And that's like sort of like, I don't know. I'm not like a philosopher in this. There are people who literally philosophize about AGI, and the people who pull their hair out and go crazy about it. But I think that in general, like the utility of being able to use it for something like a company advisor, that already is possible, right? Through the existing tool set, which is pretty cool. I had written that down because I was like, oh shit, I should make that.
I know, right?
Yeah, it's
I'm
pretty
pretty
cool.
close to having them. I mean, I'm pretty close to just making it for myself so that I could have a
Yeah.
goal setting every week and advice from, I mean, I can literally take advice from some of my favorite founders in history because there's so much information out there. Literally take their top 10 lessons and pieces of advice and things that worked for them, add it into a complex prompt in a chat bot UI, and then you say, hey, this is my company, or even you could automate a lot of that where it's built into it. Be like, what should I focus on this week? It auto puts in your KPIs and things that you have if you haven't plugged in, and then it just starts ripping advice that's based on all this that I think could be really good. Like there's opportunity to build that,
Yeah.
and it's exciting.
Yeah. That reasoning, like when you think about what's the utility of a reasoning engine, if it's not to query for general information, one thing that I'm using it for, which is really similar to what you're saying, is you could tell it to think like somebody or tell it to think like a historical figure who you really admire or who you think has a lot of, who has superior reasoning, really. Like Richard Feynman as a theoretical physicist. And there are a lot of really interesting books written about him, and he's a physicist. And so some of them are extremely technical, but it really is about like his ability to reason through things. Even Carl Sagan, but there are so many examples of really brilliant thinkers who are not just business thinkers, but more like theoretical thinkers and philosophers, who you can leverage through these tools because they're so much of the reasoning that they employed is really well documented, especially since 2001, which is when the time cutoff for most of ChatGPT's use is, other than using it like integrated with Bing, obviously, or using some other tool. So you can ask it to think like those people and get feedback on ideas that you have that actually use the Socratic method, for example, from Socrates. So like that's another really good example of things. Like we didn't really talk about that specifically, so I just wanted to call it out because I've been using it like employ Richard Feynman's sort of approach to solving this sort of problem. How would he address this? That sort of thing.
That's
It's
good.
really fun, really fun.
Yeah, I know. That shit gets me excited because it's one of those things where it gives you access to talk to people or to learn in ways that you only could do in your brain beforehand, and now you have like a second brain partner. And if you use it the right way, you're ping ponging ideas and you're
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
expanding the way you think. Like for growing a business, I have the opportunity to get advice and brainstorm and bounce weekly ideas off of concepts that I can interact with, which is so cool. Um,
Yeah,
and
it really
it,
is amazing. And yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go. That's all I have.
I'm doing exactly that is like the most fun thing. I mean, thinking about really any question and then diving deeper, like understanding like the debt ceiling had changed however many months ago, which is like sort of it's like a superfluous headline. It doesn't really matter. I don't know. That's like a controversial thought, but what does that mean? And the idea that you can like when you do that search in Google, there's so much bias. There's so much. First and foremost, I don't really use Google that much for that sort of search any longer because it's so much pay to play
Yeah,
that it really is really tough for me to discern what is and is not paid. And so I use DuckDuckGo more often just because there's less incentive for people to pay to be at the top. It's more about keyword and SEO.
yeah,
And that's not even really a good solution either. And so then you turn to Reddit, you turn to these different forums, and ultimately then you're looking to like these public community motivated people to just give free knowledge. And
yeah,
that's not necessarily something you can rely on either. And how do you validate that that information is accurate? And so just like having a relatively level-headed, unbiased, seemingly unbiased conversation about what is a debt ceiling, what would be the incentive for increasing it, what sort of long-term implications could there be from that sort of thing, what historical examples are of this, asking in like natural language in those exact words is something that wasn't available really ever before. And so it's really
yeah,
fun to sort of dive into the rabbit hole. And and I guess that this relates back to the first point around the FTC thing is like I'm not then validating it, but it is giving me a much deeper understanding of what it is that I'm asking about. And whether or not that is 100% accurate isn't necessarily the point as much as I guess that one thing I'll say about that is that I do think that it's generally accurate. And I have a lot of skepticism around it, as I have for everything always. And there's an opportunity for each response that you get to hit regenerate I think it's called regenerate.
yeah,
And you just click that button and it gives you a second example and you can toggle between the two. You can do that over and over and over and over again. And so I oftentimes will do 3 or 4 interpretations of the same contract just to get different answers, but they're mostly the same. But there are sometimes little snippets that pop out in one that weren't in the last, and then the third has a different one than the first and the second. And so I do like to regenerate responses because then it's more about what overlaps between all of them. That's the actual part to focus on than
yeah.
maybe the outlying comments from any one of them. So that's something like to think about as well. Is like don't take it at face value. Regenerate responses. Try to compare and contrast. It's like it's such a fun tool for anybody who's curious.
Yeah, exactly. It is. It's cool, and it's
Yeah,
only getting cooler.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah,
The last thing is related to we had spoken about copyright and trademark around pieces of literature, or writing, and tone of voice and things like that. And we'd expressed our opinions on that during that episode. And one thing that I come across, I subscribe to a really cool blog. It's called Technology and Marketing Law Blog. And there's some really interesting stuff that runs through here, and they have different stuff every week, and it just kind of runs through my inbox, and I read them when I have time, but they're usually pretty short. This one popped up, and I thought it was really relevant. The title of it is "How a Century-Old Insight of Photography Can Inform Legal Questions of AI-Generated Artwork." Um, and so the 1 or 2 sentence abstract is a new breed of artists are using generative artificial intelligence tools like DALL-E, Midjourney, Firefly, and ChatGPT to create artistic works. Do these creations belong to the artists or the public domain? Do creators use generative AI maintain copyright in their creations? And then it draws a comparison between like the late 1880s, or I'm sorry, early 1880s, and people taking like photos for the first time of people like Oscar Wilde, and they would do these photos at the time, they would take literally they would take time because you need to have the exposure on the lens or on the film itself through the lens. And so they would take many, many iterations of the same photo. And the same that, we had a family hangout this past weekend. We took a selfie. We do that every year during the same little trip that we do. And we don't just take one, you take multiple, right? And then you kind of, mom chooses the one she likes, and whatever happens to it, happens to it. But nonetheless, there are these different versions of the same photo, and they all captured little moments of it. And then sort of like, but at the time, people were saying this isn't art to the photography, to the photos, and because it's not actually using creativity, and because like ultimately you're taking somebody else and you're taking a photo of them, or you're taking a photo of something. It's really interesting. It's the parallels. Like the more that you think about it, initially it's like, oh, of course, photography is art. Like I have photos all over my apartment. Some of my favorite art are photos, and so it's like, oh wow, maybe I can understand why somebody would think that that's not art, but I do think that it is art. But ultimately, you can also take photos of people who are unsuspecting, and is that like stealing from them and you owe them something? I'm not sure. Like there's really famous photographers who've done that. I once took a photo of somebody in Zambia. I have the photo, and it makes me think of this because I asked him, can I take your photo? And he was wearing a Patagonia hat. And before he could say no, I took the photo and I didn't delete it. And he told me no. And so I spoke to him about it, but I'll never forget that. It's like sort of like stealing, although it's hard to imagine what you're actually stealing, but yeah, it's really interesting. And so like, I don't necessarily know that it wouldn't be art, something created by DALL-E. DALL-E. When I say DALL-E out loud, it's like, oh, the painter. Obviously, it's not it's generative AI tool by OpenAI, which is really, really cool. Midjourney is the same thing, and I know that you've used Midjourney a lot more than I have. I use DALL-E a ton. I think it's really cool. I've used it for some not random stuff, but I don't know. Do you have any strong opinions on this? I don't know that I necessarily do. I think it's an interesting conversation, but I don't necessarily know that it's like.
I think generated art is art. I think everything is inspired by. There's like a cascading effect of inspiration almost for everything. It is very weird how close you can get to other art styles by just typing in words. And I think the speed and the accuracy at which and the effort that goes into making a piece of art is different now. I like generated art, and I think it's going to create some really cool pieces of art going forward. I mean, one thing I saw recently was there was a guy in New York who was doing a show, and he created a full fake story about a gay artist from like the 1800s. And it was like they found the stash of all these paintings that he couldn't release, and it was showing men together painted from the 1800s, but he generated it all with AI. And then he generated the story with AI, and it was really compelling. And I was like, being able to create stories around artwork and almost rewrite a type of history that he wanted to see was kind of cool, and a cool expression. Same for me. Like I've generated pictures of people from the 1950s holding iPhones, and I think and from all different countries. It's super interesting to see that kind of stuff. I think you can put a good, interesting message and really creatively express ideas through generated art. So I think I like it.
Definitely.
The one sentence.
And I've been to, you sometimes go to museums, especially when you're much younger, and you're like, how is that art? Like you see like James Pollock, and you're like, how is that art? Like it's just like splashes of paint. And then as you get older, it's like, actually, it's kind of cool. And it's also like kind of a fun way it's social commentary in a way, which is kind of the coolest part about art in some way, or some art, I guess, is like, it's sort of making fun of the class of folks who pay exorbitant amounts for it by it being so simple. There's something to that I like philosophically, but like, when it comes to Midjourney and stuff, it's like, it's really interesting the point you make about like the amount of effort that goes into it. But at the same time, the amount of effort that goes into creating something that is exactly as you want it to be is probably really, really, it's probably a lot more than people assume, because using ChatGPT out the box and just like typing things in, you realize it's not some brilliant assistant off the bat.
Yeah.
You need to turn it into that. Like it needs to be prompted, and it needs to have the context in order to fulfill that role. And I don't think that those generative pieces or those art pieces necessarily are just like pumping out perfect pieces every single time. Most of the time, like you type in a sailboat, most of the sailboats, bless you, most of the boats that you then get are like, the sail doesn't actually line up. The boat's not sitting on the water. The mast isn't actually in the boat. It's above the boat. Like there are a lot of things that are inaccurate, and you need to be really specific with the prompts that you provide for it to actually be photorealistic, if that's what you're looking for.
Exactly.
So yeah, it just stood out to me, and it's like not something necessarily that we like really care that much about, but it is interesting.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good conversation, and it'll evolve over coming weeks for sure, and months and years. But
Yeah,
I got my window open. I've recently moved to Boise, and it's a little chilly, so I think I could use a hot take to get the goosebumps away. You got a hot take.
what do you got? I want to hear yours first.
So we started this podcast February, right? Or January.
Yes.
I've been kind of looking back in retrospect because I've been moving the last week and a half. And our recording schedule has been off and posting, but we're still cranking. And the way that we've changed, my hot take is that we've seen ourselves and our perspectives change through this podcast, which makes it super interesting. And I think a worthwhile thing to find people to talk to about things you're interested in. And we've gone from just talking about crypto to talking about crypto and AI, talking about AI stuff that I was building to now it's almost I've incorporated a company and actually have money coming in and users. And it's been a crazy whirlwind of 6 months doing this thing. And so my hot take is start talking more about the things you're interested in every week.
Cool. That's awesome.
But yeah.
Lukewarm. I don't think it's lukewarm. That's great. My sister's gonna love that one, by the way.
Dude, look at where we're at from when we started this.
Yeah, I still feel like I'm not really there at all, but I love that we do this. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like the things that, like I was talking to somebody recently yesterday. I had a call with somebody, and they hop on, and they're like, "Yeah, I've got a headache. I can't do it." Yeah, I was like, "It's all good, dude. We'll just push. We'll do it whatever day. Like, let's look at the calendars, put it for next week." And then he's like, "So what do you think about this? What do you say? What do you think about all this geopolitical stuff that's going on?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" So then we spent like 45 minutes to an hour talking about like geopolitics and democracy and the efficacy of like the republic that we're in, the United States, and like freedom of speech and whether or not that's actually important. And of course, I think it's like paramount, the most important thing in the world. I feel like a real patriot, to be honest with you, despite the fact that I don't identify with everybody who says that, but that's kind of the point. And so, and then at the other end of the conversation, they were saying, like, I don't really have a headache anymore. This is the kind of, like, I don't get to have these conversations very often. I was like, that's amazing. I'd love to hear that you feel comfortable enough to have this with me. And like, I try really hard to surround myself with people who are, not all my buddies are into it, but I know that you are. And like, it's something that, a lot of our relationship is founded on like being interested in politics and being interested in like what it is that is and is not important. And like chasing as much wealth as possible is certainly not like the most important thing. Something that we agreed upon really early on, and then both went our separate ways in service, like 2 years of like not making any money in different ways. But yeah, no, that's a good one. I think I couldn't agree more with you. And I look forward to many more. I think that we should not stop. I don't really have a hot take. I think it's all about, I think for me, mine are always so like stupid and full, like sort of like, oh, you could do this better. I think for me right now, I was really midday, walked to check on my car and realized it wasn't there. And that's an opportunity. I was on the phone with somebody who is a business partner of mine. And I think that, character is how you act when no one's around, but also how you act in really bad, stressful situations. And I am, even though I immediately texted Eric like, fuck, it's important to have your homie so you can be honest with and like be yourself with, but also at the same time, it's important to like make sure that you don't let that get the best of you, because I proceeded to have, made that happen. I was able to, I had a 2-hour gap, was able to make things happen that I needed to make happen and spend a lot more money than I was looking to, but ultimately came right back and got everything else done. And I have more to do, but the most important stuff is done. And so I know that there's a younger me who would have been a little bit more distracted by it even after it was all done. Yeah. So I think that, a big part of being productive and is like being able to control your emotions to a certain extent, which is hard, very hard.
Yeah. And just to take things on too, man. It's I like that. It's a good one.
It's not like I'm at war. Don't get me wrong. There are actual problems in the world.
I mean, I think you're a hero, dude.
Exactly.
I'd use the term hero.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't going to say it, but I'm glad someone did.
Yeah.
Awesome, cool. Well, maybe next week we go through some of the progress that you're seeing.
Okay.
Maybe not. I don't know. I just think that we saw a large uptick on the prompt perfect episode.
Interesting.
So maybe it's up to you. I mean, we can kind of do whatever we want, but ultimately, I think it might be interesting to get a check in on that. There's been some seriously exciting stuff, even sort of changing, and
I know
more about that. And it'll change even between then and now. Like between now and next week, there will be a lot more to talk about. So maybe it'd be fun to go through that. I know that, I don't know. I'm not sure if that interests you, but it certainly interests me.
Yeah, it does. Let's fucking do it.
Yeah. And then maybe you can share it. Like the second one, especially, we can come in with maybe more of an agenda. You could share it with folks. Like, I don't know if that's of interest, but I think that people probably, there's so little information available on ChatGPT or any of the plugins that there could be a differentiating factor with Prompt Perfect and then Prompt Test and then, Perfect Chirp. There are all these really, really interesting things that you're building. We have a forum that no one really listens to, but maybe it's an opportunity to highlight in some way.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it.
Awesome. All right, cool. Shout out to Josiah Soren for the consistently mellow and nice tunage that we start off with every week. Yeah, exactly. And we'll see you here next week.
All right, see you then.
All right, ciao.